Welcome to the special news channel. Russian President Vladimir Putin is sinking into a bigger quagmire every day he tries to continue his war in Ukraine. Having suffered great defeats in the war, which entered its 9th month, Putin has exaggerated these crazy moves for the last month by declaring a mobilization of 300,000 people and dragging the entire Russian society to the brink of an uprising. Putin drew the reaction of the entire international community with his missile and kamikaze drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. In the latest reports, it was clearly revealed that Putin could not cope with these problems. Reports published by neutral organizations stated that most of the mobilized Russian soldiers had fled before going to Ukraine. The Kremlin denied these allegations, but the latest images published on social media revealed the desperate situation of the mobilized Russian soldiers. It is seen in these images that the Russians mobilized by Putin are crushing each other in crowds. At the same time, images of some Russian soldiers evacuating their arsenals and fleeing were also featured on social media. But Putin's intention is thought to be to send everyone to Ukraine. With the heavy losses suffered by the Russian army in Ukraine, Moscow is having a hard time gathering more power. Despite a partial mobilization that officially prepared 300,000 soldiers, the Russian front troops are suffering from excessive manpower shortages. This caused the Russian commanders to take up defensive positions in almost all of Ukraine. Ukrainian forces already had a strategic advantage, and now they have operational and tactical advantages as well. It is expected that mercenary groups will find a solution to this military desperation of the Russian army. However, they also show a progress far beyond expectations. A few days ago, Russian businessman Yevgeny Prigozhin went online and accepted the allegations that Wagner Group, the notorious private military company he founded, has lowered its hiring standards to meet the manpower demands of the war in Ukraine. Prigozhin is a very close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has repeatedly used the group in the past to achieve his foreign policy goals all over the world, including Ukraine, Libya, Syria, the Central African Republic, and Mali. According to Prigozhin, the Wagner Group is currently recruiting Russian prisoners with serious health problems, including HIV and hepatitis C. Wagner Group's practice of recruiting from prisons has already been verified through open source intelligence. The role of Wagner Group has improved significantly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In its latest operational update on the war, British military intelligence has maintained relatively high enlistment standards, with many of its operators formerly serving as professional Russian soldiers in previous conflicts. If there's any question as to whether Russian forces prioritize quality over quantity, the embarrassing confessions of one of Putin's closest allies should dispel any doubt about the Russian military's recruitment priorities and the dire situation it is in after 9 months of disaster. However, it is observed that this is hardly possible, because most of them are stated to be facts beyond the claim. Prigozhin recently discussed plans to create a 200-kilometer-long defensive Wagner line in eastern Ukraine. This effort will require a large workforce. British military intelligence said there is a realistic possibility that some prisoners were initially hired to build the defenses, but even many of these possibilities stand out as ones that seem too well-intentioned for the Russian military, because even an elite group like the Wagner Group recruiting sick people reveals that this is a big problem. At the same time, the Wagner mercenary group is reported to have recruited Afghans who fought alongside the United States against the Taliban in Afghanistan. The Wagner Group is Vladimir Putin's notorious private army of ruthless mercenaries. Insiders explain that Afghan soldiers who previously fought alongside American troops are now recruited by Russia to fight in Ukraine. In a brutal twist of fate, the 3 former Afghan generals said thousands of ex-commandos who fled to Iran after the chaotic US withdrawal last year were lured into a foreign legion of overseas fighters. Now, they are constantly tempted by offers of £1,300 a month payouts and promises of safe haven for themselves and their families, so they can avoid being deported to a country that many consider would be death at the hands of the Taliban. They do not want to go and fight, but they have no other choice. Foreigners who do not want to come to the region are also under threat in their own country. It was stated that some war analysts spoke to a dozen Afghan commanders and that they feared deportation from Iran, where they had taken refuge, if they did not participate in the war in Ukraine. It is clear that if these commanders return to Afghanistan, the Taliban will kill them. For this reason, he is desperately forced to join the ranks of the Russians. The Wagner Group directly manages the recruitment process. Another general, Hibatullah Alizai, the last Afghan army chief before the Taliban took over, said the efforts were also assisted by a former Afghan Special Forces commander who lived in Russia and spoke the language. Russia's enlistment comes after months of warnings from US soldiers fighting Afghan Special Forces that the Taliban are intent on killing them and may join US enemies to survive or to avoid anger at their former allies. In August, a Republican Party congressional report specifically warned of the danger of Afghan commandos trained by US Navy SEALs and Army Green Berets informing or fighting for the Islamic State group, Iran or Russia, about US tactics. Emphasizing that Afghan commandos are extremely talented and fierce fighters, a retired CIA officer in Afghanistan said, "I honestly don't want to see them on any battlefield, but they are definitely not fighting the Ukrainians." Still, Mr. Mulroy was skeptical that Russia would be able to persuade many Afghan commandos to join, as many he knew were driven by a desire to run democracy in their country rather than act as hired guns. The recruitment comes as Russian forces are stripped of Ukrainian military advances, and Russian President Vladimir Putin continues a mobilization effort that has caused nearly 200,000 Russian men to flee the country to escape service. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not respond to a request for comment. A spokesperson for Yevgeny Prigozhin, who recently admitted to being the founder of the Wagner Group, described efforts to recruit ex-Afghan soldiers as crazy bullshit. The US Department of Defense also did not respond to a request for comment, but a senior official said the recruitment was not surprising given that Wagner was trying to send troops to many other countries. It's unclear how many Afghan Special Forces members Russia has reached in Iran, but one said it communicated via WhatsApp with about 400 commandos who were considering offers. The commando said his offer included Russian visas for him and his 3 children and wife, who are currently in Afghanistan. Others were offered an extension of their visas in Iran. He said he's waiting to see what others in the WhatsApp groups decide, but thinks many will agree to the deal. In other words, even if Putin succeeds in convincing these commandos somehow, considering the situation in the Russian army, he may face much more painful tables, because it is already known that indiscipline is the main problem of the Russian army at the moment. The possibility that Afghan commanders who are not loyal to the Russian army will attempt to revolt after a while should also be considered. But if Putin cannot bring these foreign soldiers to Ukraine, he will suffer a heavy defeat. This will mean his end. For this reason, Putin has put into practice even his craziest moves.